Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host, Leanne Hughes.
G'day everyone, and thanks so much for joining us on the show today. I'm your host, Leanne Hughes, and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. On last week's show, I interviewed Lydia Musa about how we can create change for ourselves, our teams, and our organizations. Now, she lives and breathes change. So if you get stuck with figuring out how to navigate that, and it's something that we have to do a lot more of, is navigating all of this change, then listen into that show. Now, I'm still also getting so much love for the interview I did with Mark Bowden about body language back in episode 102. So did that have a big impact on you as well? If so, let me know. I love hearing a lot of feedback on each episode. You can shoot me an email, hello@leannehughes.com, or a DM on Instagram at Leanne Hughes. But as you know, I'm pretty much on every platform, so I'm sure you'll find a way of getting in touch. This week, I was meant to be working again in Papua New Guinea. I went there in mid-January for a few days to meet my clients and employees at the office that I'll be supporting. And then I'm back again a couple of times this month in February 2020, helping to roll out a new initiative and supporting that with workshops and coaching. But the trip was delayed. So I'll be in Brisbane this week due to work visas being a bit tough. That's a big impact, a direct impact on the coronavirus. So it's quite funny, even as a solopreneur, how things like this, and that's why we do things like SWOT analysis and risk assessments, because they can have a direct impact on our business. Anyway, the good news is visas are now open again to Papua New Guinea, so I'm heading there next week. So this week's show is all about a question that I've been asking myself recently. When do you stop calling yourself a first-time facilitator? What does it take? What's the criteria? How do you feel? How do you know when you've stepped past that? I've given a bit of consideration to this and put together my thoughts in this episode. Now, these are my opinions and they aren't based on cold, hard evidence or data or anything like that. It's really just my experience and my journey from stepping up in the world of leading workshops and how far that I feel that I've come on certain aspects. Also, a nice self-reflection piece for you if you're listening in. Where do you think you need to improve, or what aspects can you double down on? Have a think. And if you think you'd still classify yourself as a first-time facilitator, you may be interested in joining my First-Time Facilitator Bootcamp. The waitlist is open for that now over at leannehughes.com/bootcamp. Now, the aim of this program is to really accelerate your transformation from a slightly uncomfortable person stepping up to deliver a workshop experience to someone who has that confidence and in the way that they sort of introduce themselves, the way that they get the groups working together, the way that they share instructions very succinctly in a way that the participants can understand. I'll be also throwing in mini challenges through the online experience, so making it fun, making it practical so you actually complete it, creating a bit of community, a bit of sort of, peer accountability as well. It just won't be an online self-paced program where you sign up really motivated and then after the first 2 modules, you don't make it through. So that will be kicking off in early March of 2020. So to find out more, you can visit leannehughes.com/bootcamp. And if you'd like to continue the conversation when the podcast is over, join over 550 facilitators from all around the world on the free group on Facebook called The Flip Chart. See you in there. Now you can find a link to the bootcamp, the flip chart, and everything else mentioned in this one over at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 104. Now, on to the show. First question for you. Did you ever call yourself a first-time facilitator? Interestingly enough, I'm a host of this show of the same name, but I don't know if I actually use that phrase or that language to describe what I do, but I certainly used phrases like newbie, even in my self-talk. Now, I remember searching for articles on Google, articles like, the key skills for facilitators. I remember even searching how to deliver a workshop. Now that I think about it, that is a really broad search term. And I don't know if it's a label that I use, but I guess in this episode, what I wanted to describe were some of the transformations which I think can take you from being that newbie, feeling uncomfortable, hey, sometimes maybe even dreading a workshop. So walking past that label of newbie, first time facilitator, to someone that is capable, feels confident, and isn't so nervous about running and leading these workshops. And we've had some really interesting discussions in the Flipchart Facebook group of the definition of a facilitator. Now, as you hear, what I'm doing at the moment, so right now, is a lot of corporate training in the field of leadership and team development. But I deliver that training in a facilitative way. However, if you look at the IAF, that is the International Association of Facilitators, they even talk about how do you go from leading workshops to being a facilitator. So they talk about the transformation from leading a workshop to being a facilitator. If you're a long-time listener of this show, you know this one is all about, my podcast is really about the leading workshops aspect. So I think this year I'm keen to talk to some more folks from the IAF to get their perspective on the role of a facilitator using techniques like ORID, which is an acronym, and focused conversation and other strong processes to facilitate group outcomes. Now, that's a little different to what I'm exploring in this episode. So the reflections I'm talking about today are based on my own experiences from, and also I guess what I'm observing from newbie to seasoned facilitators, and exploring like what is the difference between those two groups. The other question I'd also love to throw to you as a listener is, what is the definition, or what do you call someone who has graduated and is no longer a first-time facilitator? Do you graduate straight to telling everyone that you're a facilitator? Is that the way that you describe what you do? Or is facilitation a methodology of the way that you deliver your work? Hit me up, let me know what your thoughts are on that. So here are some things I think first-time facilitators do, or that I've observed them do, or that I did myself. Now, the first one is apologizing. Something that I did when I was a first-time facilitator, and it sometimes creeps in as well, is apologizing for things. So it might be, I'm sorry, I was only told I had to run this workshop 2 days ago, so I'm sorry if it's not that great. Or sorry, we won't have time to talk about this, but ... What I want you to remember, and something that is really quite comforting, I think, to know, is that your audience have no idea what you're about to say or do. Yes, it's 2020, but we haven't developed the ability to read minds yet. So they don't know what you had intended to do versus what you're delivering for them in the moment. And this is probably something that I've stolen from the public speaking world. So in public speaking and professional speakers, keynote speakers, they always talk about not apologizing to your audience. So that your participants don't know that you missed that part. They don't know that you forgot to tell that story. They don't know that you skipped a line in your own introduction. They don't know any of that. So don't apologize. Don't apologize if you think you've screwed it up. Don't apologize if you've forgotten something. Don't apologize if you weren't given much time to plan. And I think this really relates back, and that's why I sort of mentioned the Mark Bowden episode at the beginning of this episode, is I think it's sort of key listening, because what he says is that what you present is an imprint of your brand, particularly at the beginning of a workshop. So if you step up there and in your first 5 minutes, you apologize, what you're branding into the audience, what brand you're imprinting on them, and the impression is that you might not be prepared. Why should they trust you? It's not a credibility booster. So that's the thing of the nature of facilitation, is that things don't go to plan all the time. And that's why I find it, I love it because of the variety, but it can also sometimes keep you up at night because you are concerned about things. But that's the beauty of it, I think. So part of what we do is unpredictability. Things will happen. What we need to showcase when we get in front, particularly if we're leading a corporate training session or we're the expert or we're there to facilitate a process, is people, we want to gain their trust. And you don't really gain their trust by apologizing. I've been in audiences where the first time someone stepped up that they've apologized, and it kind of makes me feel a bit awkward. So think about your experiences when you've been a participant in a room listening to a speaker or a facilitator that stepped up, and the first words that out of their mouths like, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry the technology is not working. I'm sorry, ... It doesn't really matter what the apology is about, but it makes you feel a little bit awkward and you think, how is the rest of this going to go? I think that's why it's up front as rule number, I shouldn't call these rules, but in terms of transformations, I did a lot of apologizing when I was a first-time facilitator, a newbie. What I've recognized now is, hell yeah, there are still places for me to apologize, things that go wrong, but I just dismiss it and focus on what I can serve and what I can offer the participants. So putting them in the picture and recognizing that apologizing isn't the way. Now, of course, like if I say something like, okay, you can refer to this model, it's on page 11 of your workbook, and the model is on page 8, yes, I'll apologize, of course. I'm not talking about sort of little things like that later on in the workshop, but I think right at the beginning, just do what you can with presenting full confidence and dismiss the apology. Newbie facilitator, one thing I used to do was I'd get my topic and workshop brief and I'd head straight to Google. And I've kind of talked about this in episode 101 when I reflect on my 100 lessons. So I won't talk about it too much, but it's basically, okay, Leanne, you got to run a workshop on resilience, which I haven't done before. I've just pulled that out of my head. First step as a newbie facilitator, first timer, was to hop onto Google and search for resilience workshops, resilience activities. But let's go back to what Tim Ferguson said in our interview. It's all about planting in your mind your audience. So what do you think they need? When I was a first-time facilitator, it was all content. As I've gotten older and wiser, I figured out through the help of all previous guests that the best place to start is with the audience. Now, we know this, so I'm just going to throw in some new considerations that I think about now that I didn't think about when I first started. So, questions like, how much time do I have with the group? Am I delivering this workshop as part of an overall day? If so, that's great. Well, in terms of that day, what content does my session follow? So if there's been a session on something that's quite deep, or there's been an announcement, that would be really helpful for me to know about. It will help me structure what's in my presentation. What I really hate, and again, this all comes from my participant perspective, is when someone's delivered content on something and then the next presenter will come up and talk about or explain the concept again. And I think our participants, our groups are smart. We don't need to hear things repeated. It's how do you build on that and move on? So in order to build on it, it helps to know what is preceding you. Also consider, what time of day are you on? Is your workshop in the afternoon? If so, think about what you're like in the afternoon. Yes, we know people are, particularly after lunch, we know the after lunch crowd. It's an old joke in our world of how people are just not as energetic. But also think about what kind of pressure are they under. So usually at that time of day, they've had meetings in the morning, their mind is in a different place, they've got all these emails they need to respond to. It's very different delivering in the afternoon compared to first thing in the morning. What do you need to do or adapt as a facilitator who puts your audience first, and think about what previous experiences they're also bringing in as well. And that doesn't mean to that day, it means in general. Think about their demographics, but also their psychographics. What is their motivation for even being there? Is there any motivation at all? And look, I think I spoke about this in episode 101, but yeah, the workshop begins before it has even really begun. So a lot of that pre-sell, pre-commitment, communication beforehand is key. So I think, let's just think audience first and then content can follow after that. What I did as a first-time facilitator, my third point, is I used to impersonate other people. And look, I think I still do to some extent, but it's a bit more refined. I used to think of the facilitators that I loved, and I used to try and do things exactly the same way that they would do it. I think following facilitators and taking out the best things from them is great, but most importantly, it's right, and I think it's right for you to figure out how what they're doing would work from your perspective. Now, this all plays into authenticity, which is the buzzword for 2020. So I'm sorry for repeating it here. I do pride myself on not talking about buzzwords, but look, it's true. I would just and it's embarrassing to say, I'd even use the words they were using, their body language, and it just participants, they can detect this from a mile away. And I think it's part of the process of stepping up as a facilitator, though, is actually trying all these different things out And I guess that's the beauty of being a first timer, is that you can pilot things and learn from the experiences. The good news is we're not heart surgeons. No one will die. Look, it's probably not a lesson, but maybe something just to consider in the back of your mind when you are stepping up as a facilitator. Do observe what works well and what you love. Try and incorporate, see how it feels, but do it in a way that's right for you. Let's talk about intimidation. So when I was a first-time facilitator and I was thinking about the audience, I was looking at their role title and was very intimidated. So even last year, and this isn't me as a first-time facilitator, it's someone who's facilitated a lot, I was looking at their role title and saying, wow, these are project managers that are in charge of multi-million-dollar construction projects. And here I am, Leanne, and I'm telling them about leadership. And when you think about that logically, it just sounds a bit, the logical brain and the negative bias creeps in, and you might get a bit of that imposter syndrome. So who am I to be stepping up and telling these people about leadership? Now, the cool thing is, through my experience and what I've built up and what I've learned over time, is that because I work in the organizational development space and leadership and group dynamics and organizational culture, because I read about it, I study it, I listen to podcasts on it, I'm the expert on that. They're the experts on leading million-dollar projects. What that means is they may not, and we tend to find this, which is unfortunate, have the time dedicated to doing the work that I do. So we're experts in different fields. I think you really need to think about that. And if you're not an expert and you're a pure facilitator, you are a pure facilitator because you are the expert in asking brilliant questions. You're the expert at guiding people in a process. You're the expert at getting these groups talking, getting a safe environment. Now, that is something that should not be undervalued. So as a newbie facilitator, I think it's important to switch your focus, yes, to recognize, okay, these are the roles of the people in the room, but the reason I'm being asked in is to provide something that no one else in this room can provide, whether that's my ability to even step up and deliver this sort of stuff. So many people are in these organizations and don't have the confidence to speak in public. So the fact that we're already putting our hands up and volunteering is pretty amazing, I think. And I think you should give yourselves a pat in the back for even exploring this, because a very limited number of people are willing to do what we do. The other thing that someone said to me, this was when I was back working in corporate, and I was invited to facilitate my own company's executive leadership team 3-day retreat. Now, this is my own managing director and the ELT. So a couple of levels above me, and I'm the one that has to guide the conversation and structure the process and the agenda and, interject sometimes when someone is talking for too long. It should be pretty intimidating. Like, these people were pretty awesome people. Like, they're great. And of course they're down to earth and all of that, but you still have this imposter syndrome. Like, why am I even in the room? And someone else said to me, hey, Leanne, if they've asked you to do this, then they believe in you. And that was such a great statement for me. So I'm passing it on to all of you. If you find yourself in the position of being up in front of a workshop or presenting or facilitating from the back of the room, wherever you like to stand, and that imposter syndrome or that intimidation is creeping in, I just want you to remember that you're there for a reason. And if you don't have faith in yourself, well, guess what? Someone else has had faith in you, and they've seen that potential in you to invite you to do what you do. So you've already won. I think you've already won. So give yourself, again, I'm going to make you do it right now. Just pause this, or if you're driving, or you don't actually need to pause it, but pat yourself on the back and congratulate yourself on where you are, that you are doing this, because it's a rare percentage of the population that do these workshops that are prepared to step up. So congratulations. Something we don't really talk about too much, but is so important, are giving explicit instructions that are really easy and simple to understand. And also, there's the irony in this, I'm not explaining this too well. And also, if you're doing an activity, making sure you have all the materials on hand. Look, it's such a logistical thing that we haven't really spoken about it on this show. We've kind of skimmed past it. But yes, it's really great to create these activities, but you need to also consider how you'll explain it. Consider all the different learning styles. I did talk about this in another episode, but if you explain it, that's great. Think about, do you need text on a screen or a flip chart to explain it even more if it's a more complex activity? Do you explain it in one step, or can you give everyone the instructions all at once? How do you grab their attention when you're explaining it and ensure they're not wandering off and already starting? I do explore a lot of this activity explanation in an episode with Michael Bungay-Stanier, who that conversation will be released in February, so later this month. But working in the activity with the environment that you're given. So if you've explored an activity and getting everyone to stand in a circle, and then you get into the workshop room and that's actually not possible, well, you're going to have to figure out beforehand or in real time how you adapt the activity to make it work. And we often find that the room, tables, all that can be a constraint, which enables us to have to be more creative. But I think from my experience, it's important to figure out how you're going to explain the activity in a succinct way that is easy to repeat, that people will understand. And 2, yes, have an idea in your mind of how the activity will work, but also consider when you step up beforehand, when you're setting up the room, how certain activities are going to work for you given that environment. You'll also get a clue of the audience as well. Like sometimes I've planned an activity, but getting to know the group over the first hour or 2 or even through the half day, I think, oh, you know what, this activity may not work. It might have been something that I've picked up from a conversation, whatever it is, I just get a feeling it might not work. Now, sometimes I'll run with the activity anyway, and look, I'll be surprised. And I think that's going back to what Mark was talking about, that negative bias that we may have. Other times I do back myself and just go, look, I don't think this will work. Let's try something different. And usually when I try something different, that seems to hit the mark more. So another big pickup for first-time facilitators, be very clear when you prescribe an activity. How else have I transformed? Well, you might have heard this story if you've been listening for a long time, but when I used to try to get the attention of all my participants after an activity, so everyone's noisy, they're talking, and I wanted to grab their attention, I would yell out, "Pens down." Anyway, I was given feedback, thank you, Nikki, on that annoying catchphrase. And so I've changed my way. But my lesson here is figure out what is your own unique way of grabbing everyone's attention. So I've brought in using the ting bell, the Tibetan bells. Again, thank you, Michael Bungay-Stanier, for that. They have a really nice ring. I also use music. So if you listen into my episode about tuning up your workshop, I use music. So I either play music, and then when the music stops, everyone else seems to stop talking, which works really well. Using body language, getting someone in the audience to whistle. So there's all different ways. But yeah, my 2, I guess, particularly with big groups, will probably be that bell and the use of music as well. And everyone has their own unique way, again, being authentic, their way of grabbing everyone's attention. So have a good little think about what is the best way that you can grab everyone's attention. Dealing with feedback, something I continue to want to get better at. I guess this links into SCARF, and I've spoken about that model a lot, but what feedback does, positive or negative, it affects our status, which is the S for SCARF. So it can either give us a boost, we're rewarded because someone's given us amazing feedback and we feel really great, and all that great stuff that we love hearing. On the other hand, we can get constructive/negative feedback, or feedback that may not be too constructive, but it's part of the process as well, and that can threaten our status. And again, we're really sort of drawn towards the negative, and we think about the negative stuff, or even sometimes the construction stuff, the constructive feedback. We focus on that more. And I sort of joked with Adam, but when we got our feedback from the Strengths Summit, there was sort of 1 or 2 comments that we had outstanding feedback. If you look at it from a data perspective, our feedback was tremendous. Now, this is the workshop we delivered at the Gallup Clifton Strengths Summit in Omaha last year. But when I was scrolling down the Excel spreadsheet, I was just drawn to the 3 out of 5 star feedback, and then looking at the comments and dismissing all the 95% of wonderful comments and really focusing on that 5%. And I think this is an innately human thing. So I don't know, like, I think, look, if you look at Buddhist philosophy, it's about detaching yourself. So what that means is you read the positive feedback, but you don't really, like, it doesn't play into your ego. It's like, okay, that is what it is. And it's the same for constructive feedback too. So that's probably the answer in dealing with all of this, is to just detach from it. But when I certainly, and look, I'm not there yet, but when I first started, it was really focusing on that negative and stewing about it. So what I've come to learn though over the last few years, and continue to learn from previous guests on this podcast, is, look, there's some things that we just can't control. Like, we can't control how someone feels towards our workshop. I mean, the only thing we can control is how we show up at the workshop, all the preparation, how we've actually sort of tailored what we do to match their requirements, getting them feeling like, well, no, we can't even do that, but putting ourselves in a position where we can offer the best service for that person and that group for that moment in time. That's all that we can do. And it really relates back to Covey's circle of concern and influence. We can't control someone else's feedback towards us. Where it's important then with feedback is to recognize what is constructive, what can I work on, and ask yourself that question, like, is this feedback valid? Did I notice it in myself? Ask someone else for feedback, so you're getting other people's opinions as well, and balancing it. Again, as you can probably hear from how I'm describing it, I'm still working through this. So I find it hard to detach from the really positive stuff. Like, I'll totally take that on. And yeah, it totally feeds the ego, which has also given me more confidence to then step up and show up in other ways. Where the negative stuff comes in does help me to reconfigure what I'm doing, but I can't change my personality. I don't want to tone things down. What it also gets me clearer on is the type of work I want to do, the kind of work that I'm gravitated towards, the kind of clients that I gravitate towards. So I'm using that as information to start focusing on things that actually give me more energy, fill my buckets, and I'm not smashing my head against the wall to make something work. And I think that works in both our favor, but the client's favor as well. And what I tended to find, particularly when I worked internally for organizations, is we'd choose a facilitator which we trusted, but which also resonated with our employees. So this is why it's really important to sort of find your lane. I know it's another sort of buzz phrase, to find your lane and go hard, and to actually really celebrate your uniqueness. It actually has longer term benefits, rather than having to twist your personality, twist your brand into something that you're not comfortable with. So again, you're not showing up as being your authentic self. And then if you can just be more of yourself and use the feedback to discover what's working for you, you're playing to your strengths and doubling down on that. Figuring out where the constructive feedback is coming in, what you can do. Is it important for you to work on that? Is that part of where you want to be in a year or 2 years? Will that form part of your plan? Or using that feedback to discover what parts and then do I want to let go? So I guess the aim for all of us as facilitators is to detach from any type of feedback, recognize it, observe it, ask ourselves questions, get more deeper meaning around why we're maybe feeling a certain way, and then consider, right, reflected on it, what's the action? Is there any action to take? If not, park it and let's move on with our lives. How do you find feedback, by the way? Again, I've given you my contact details at the start of this episode, so please let me know. I want to know, are you feeling the same way, or am I just over analyzing this sort of stuff? So those are a few key things that I've discovered, and I think it does link into nicely to episode 101, where I reflect on all those lessons that I've learned. But I guess here are some really key sort of transitions that I've learned from being a newbie to then being more confident in what I do now. I've really sort of laid down how I get attention from the group, I stop apologizing, how I set instructions, how I deal with feedback, how I've booted that imposter monster, and I've stopped impersonating other people as well. So if you are listening to this episode and you think you're stuck on a few of these things and you want to accelerate your growth in training and facilitating, like I said at the beginning of this episode, you can get on the wait list for the First Time Facilitator Bootcamp over at leannehughes.com/bootcamp. Now, I just want to make this clear about the bootcamp. First of all, there are so many facilitator and train the trainer resources out there. So I don't think the problem is in the amount of information available. I don't think you need any more of that. If you really want information, you can listen to the last 103 episodes of this show, or hop onto Google or the flip chart. People have mentioned some really great books, and also there's, I'm sure, some local courses in your area about training and facilitation. I guess my role in this bootcamp is I don't want to add to that noise. The aim isn't to give you more and more information. What I'm using my ideation, that's my number one strength on, so my creative brain power, I'm using that to design an experience which will give you the transformation. So to get you from knowing all this, you're probably listening to this episode going, I know all this, Leanne. So how do I actually take the action? So through this bootcamp, we're going to do many challenges. So things like crafting your 1-minute facilitation introduction, things like that, to give you the shortcuts and the tools as well that you need to implement this. And guess what? You don't need to do all of the things to be an effective facilitator. So it's figuring out what's important to you. Not getting you to impersonate what I do, but getting you to figure out for yourself what will work and how you can really show up as your authentic facilitation self with more confidence. Because if you're doing it right now or you've been asked to do it, you deserve to be up there. Class starts in early March, but I'll be doing a free webinar in late February. I'm on my newsletter, actually, I'm putting a poll so you can vote on what the webinar and masterclass should be about, and that's for free. So if you're not on the newsletter, hop on over to firsttimefacilitator.com. There's a pop-up there, or you can sign up on my website, leannehughes.com. Yes, I need to figure out my branding, but hey, 2 websites at the moment is working for me. Thanks so much for listening into this week's show. I look forward to bringing you another interview next week with someone from over the other side of the world. Look forward to chatting to you then. Please get in touch through the week if anything in this episode has resonated with you, and go forth and deliver your unpredictable workshop experiences. And look, if you're still listening in the meantime, if you do like the show, I'd love you to help out and get the word out to other people. So there are a few ways you can spread the word. You can simply send them a link to firsttimefacilitator.com, or leave a rating and review in iTunes to boost the public presence of the show. Thanks, First Time Facilitators. Chat next week.